Hello, my name is Grandmaster Daniel Gormally, or Danny Gormally, and welcome to part 6 of my series on how to calculate. So this is the final part, and in this part I want to look a bit more about candidate moves, about identifying candidate moves, because I think that's such an important part of calculation. And I want to give you an example of a good attacking game that I played with white. So just for a change, I'm not going to show one of my losses. I'm going to actually show one of my wins. And this was a game I played in the Shropshire Congress against International Master John Cox. And this was a game played at 9:30 in the morning, so it's like really early in the morning. Now, in weekend tournaments, you usually play one game on a Friday, 2 games on a Saturday, and 2 games on the Sunday. Now, they even have these horrible tournaments where you actually play 3 games on the Saturday, which is really brutal sort of punishment for any chess players who sort of happen to play in these sort of tournaments. But 2 games, even 2 games on a Saturday can be quite hard, especially if you have long games. I mean, I'm not a great fan of morning games, I have to say. So 9:30 in the morning, I sort of got up at 8:30. Went down to the hotel reception at 8:50, got a lift to the venue, and so sort of playing very, very tired. And I was really struggling to stay awake at the board. But if we look at the game, so I'm white, play e4, a9, c6, now I play bishop b5. Now this is one of these sort of openings where you don't need to know a lot of theory as white. I mean, the ideas behind this open. I was coaching some guy recently, and he said to me, I struggle to know what to do in the openings. I mean, once I get out the opening into the middle game, I'm really suffering because I don't know how to come up with a plan. Now, I said to him, one of the ways in which you can improve and get past this problem of not knowing what to do is just to look at a lot of games in your particular opening and get a feel for the general ideas. Now, a lot of the ideas behind this particular opening are quite simple. White wants to take on c6, sort of fracture black's pawn structure, and then play in a very strategical fashion. So, for example, if black was to play g6 in this position, white takes, black takes with a pawn, white goes d3. Now, generally speaking, black has the 2 bishops, yes, but he also has defaults in his pawn structure that white can possibly exploit. I remember in one of the earliest games I ever played in a chess tournament, I actually lost in a very similar way with black. In fact, I remember my opponent played an early bishop b5 in a Sicilian when my knight was on c6. And because I was so inexperienced, I actually played a6 to provoke bishop takes c6. Like, this was a great move. And I lost horribly, if I seem to recall. But again, a lot of it's to do with strategic understanding. Understand the fact that you can exploit this weakened pawn structure by black. But of course, my opponent didn't play this move. He played the main line, which was knight d4. Now I came back with a bishop. It's very important to preserve this bishop now, because if black was to take on b5, you're not harming his pawn structure in any way, so that's quite an important point. So after knight d4, he played the move e6. Now, it's certainly possible in this line. I mean, there's lots of possible moves. I know Magnus Carlsen in this position has played the move knight f6. And there's quite a clever idea behind this move. Now, if white was to continue with a natural looking e5, trying to push the knight away, rather than responding with a passive move like knight g8, black responds actively with the move d5. And this is a very, very clever move. Now, of course, if I take on f6, you take on c4. And black has a very active position. There's suddenly the 2 bishops come into play. He's threatening stuff like bishop f5. Basically, just the position's very, very open, which really suits the 2 bishops. So this is a quite clever move order by Magnus. But it often transposes into these other lines that I had eventually against John Cox. Now, another move black can play is also the move g6. just intending to fianchetto the bishop on the king side. And this is a very solid way to play for black as well. Now white generally responds with knight f3, bishop g7, and then the move knight takes d4. Now the clever idea behind this, I mean there's quite a few traps in this opening which makes it quite a tempting choice for white. The clever idea is after pawn takes you play queen f3. Now black has several ways of meeting the threat of queen takes f7 checkmate. Probably the best way is to play the move knight h6. And after white plays knight e2, you castle. I play d3. And now it looks as if black's under a bit of pressure because the knight on h6 is rather out of the game. But he has quite a clever sort of equalising move. He can play the move knight g4, intending to bring the knight round to a much better square on e5. Now the main point of this move is after queen takes g4, white gets hit with the move d5. And this really sort of creates a real disturbance in white's position. Even though he probably wins a pawn, he gets this kind of rather ugly sort of looking pawn structure. Black has several ways to put pressure on white in this position. So generally speaking, the best way to equalise is with move knight h6. But there's quite a trappy move in this position that, I mean, he could also possibly play knight f6, but I mean, even f5 is a possibility as well, which is quite a radical move, but it's perfectly playable. But often you'd find in these positions that black plays the move e6. And one of the things I find actually in the opening is there's always a tendency to play the opening too quickly. And you also sort of think that you only need to calculate later on in the game. Like when you reach the middle game or the end game, that's when you start calculating. Now, I think that's a big mistake. I think it's a very bad idea to play the game on autopilot. Even if you know the moves, even if you know the opening moves, you should still think about them. You should still think, is this the right move? You know? Because then when later on, it's very difficult to then switch to start thinking about your chess moves. So I think it's very important to start calculating early in the game. Now, a lot of players have made a mistake of playing e6, which is a really bad move, because now white plays the move knight d5, putting huge pressure on black. And the main idea really is that after the move d6, white is again a very clever move in this position. He plays the move queen a3, utilising the fact this queen has reached a third rank. So after queen a3, black's got serious problems defending this d pawn. Now, if he goes bishop e5, you can play c3, and after d takes c3, after d takes c3, you even have the possibility of going d4, attacking the bishop on e5. So this isn't a very good line for black. Now bishop f8 is also got its own problems because, well, for one thing, the pawn on d4 might be unprised, and secondly, white may be able to even play queen d3 and attack it that way. So bishop f8 looks very passive. And another move that black players have played in this position is king e7. But you really want your king out in the middle of the board right at the start of the game? I don't think so. So basically, this whole line is actually quite tricky for black. With g6. Worth remembering if you ever play this line, you know, it's worth remembering these moves because a lot of players with black tend to fall into these sort of traps. But of course, like I say, my opponent didn't play g6. He played the very solid move e6. But again, there's some interesting traps in this variation as well. I played the move knight ge2. It's a very natural developing move. He could, of course, take on e2, but then I play queen takes e2 with a lead. Well, basically with a lead in development. I've developed two minor pieces, and he's only developed one. So this is one of the advantages of this particular opening for white, is that he often gets quite a big lead in development. My opponent played very solid, knight f6. Again, if e5 is met with the very clever counter thrust d5. And of course, if you take en passant, Then bishop takes d6. Black has a very good position. He's caught up in development, and he has very nice control over the centre. In fact, you could argue if anyone's better here, it's black. But I didn't go e4, of course. I simply castled. Now there's a trap. Basically, he played a6, but in this position, it's quite an interesting trap that black can fall into with the move d5. Now, this looks like a very natural move. You're sort of developing the... you're sort of opening up the position. You know, you're playing a central break, just getting ready to play a move like bishop e7 or bishop d7. Basically just putting the pressure on white. Now, you know, at first glance, this looks like a very good idea. But the problem is, because white has this leading development, he's able to exploit this move. And he's able to create serious tactical problems for black. So what he does is he takes on d5. After pawn takes d5, he simply takes again. Incredible move. Bear in mind that black cannot take on e2, because queen takes e2 comes with check. So he's kind of obliged to take the piece. And now we go knight takes d4. Now, again, we're kind of obliged to take. But now comes the move queen h5, which is a really nasty move. Now, you know, at first glance, well, you know, if you move the knight, obviously I'm taking on f7. Again, this is where calculation comes into play. But the natural move, of course, to defend that knight on d5 would be the move bishop e6. But then again, that's met with another developing move with a threat, rook e1. And now black is under serious pressure because if he plays queen d7, trying to defend against the threat of rook takes e6, we simply take on d5 with the bishop, utilising the pin. And we've basically won a pawn with a very good position. So this is something that black will try and avoid. So he'll probably play a move like bishop e7 in this position. And after rook takes e6, you can try to move knight f4. But then white has a saving move in this position. He can play the move queen b5 check. And after king f8, simply move the rook back. And he's basically won a pawn, he's got the two bishops, he's ahead in development, he's basically got a winning position. So this is quite a clever trap by white, which is why a lot of players played a move which John Cox played in the game, which was the move a6. Now, I've actually had this myself as black, and I played the move. Sorry, I was playing against Simon Williams at Hastings. This is going back several years ago. You know, quite a few years ago. It must be more than 10 years ago now that we played this game. Probably 12 or 13 years ago. And the interesting thing about this game was I was basically staying in the same hotel as Simon. Now I walked past his room, and he was chatting to another friend of mine, which is a guy called Richard Pert. And Richard, if anyone knows Richard, he's very sort of outgoing, sort of, I think he works in the city, so it's, you know, I mean, basically you can hear him from about 10 blocks away. And he was sort of like chatting to Simon and saying to him, oh yeah, you should play this line against Gormali, this is a great way to play. So, you know, being a sort of curious, obviously being the sort of conscientious guy that I am, I chose not to listen to this conversation and walked by immediately. No, I actually did. I did listen to, briefly listen to what he was saying, and I gathered that he was going to play this variation against me. So I decided to prep up this A6 line, and Simon played A4, and I played D5. Now Simon made the mistake of thinking everything's the same as in the previous variation. You can still sacrifice a piece. This is not the case. Knight takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d4, pawn takes, queen h5, bishop e6. rook e1. So we get the same position, but there's a slight subtle difference. And again, a lot of this comes down to calculation. You know, you need to take the time to check all the details, check all the variations, because I'm sure if Simon had taken the time to actually check his variations here, he would have realised this isn't exactly the same. Because I now play the move bishop e7. And the point is that after rook takes e6, knight f4, white does no longer has this saving queen b5 check. So he's actually in a lot of trouble here. Because if he moves the queen somewhere, well, we simply take the rook on e6 and we're a rook up. So he was obliged to play the variation rook takes e7, queen takes e7. And technically speaking, black is probably already winning because he's exchange up. And white hasn't developed his queen side yet. So this is, well, I really should have won the game, but later on I made a mistake myself in calculation, and I allowed Simon to escape with a draw. So that was really stupid. But yeah, this is a good example of why this little subtle differences in the position can make all the difference. But we'll continue with the John Cox game, and we'll see what I play. Well, basically, I play what's probably the main move is you don't play a4 because this is rather allowing black to play d5. So you play the move d3. Now John played, of course, he played b5, bishop b3, and he took. Pawn takes, and he went bishop b7. So on the face of it, black is doing really well. He's got the two bishops. His bishop is on b7 and on a good long diagonal. And yes, I think in general, to be honest with you, this position, theoretically speaking, is not better for white. In fact, if anything, it's probably better for black in a theoretical sense. You know, I always think with the two bishops in the long term, I mean, this is a good example where white has a slight initiative. In a way, you could say this variation is similar to the Trompowsky opening, because there white also gives up his two bishops advantage. He gives black the advantage of the two bishops, but in return for that, he gets a temporary initiative. Now, I've always said, again, go back to my friend Richard Pert, who wrote a book on the Trompowsky, always say, well, actually, the Trompowsky's a load of rubbish. Because it's a strategically bad opening. You're giving up the two bishops. But of course, you know, nothing in chess is that simple. The knights are also very powerful pieces. But you do have to be careful that you don't allow the position to be open. So white always has to be in two minds here. Well, not in two minds, but in the mind that basically he has to be careful that he doesn't allow black to open up the position. Now, again, I think in this, rather like the Trompowsky, I think if black plays correctly here, he's not only equal, he has chances to be a lot better later on because of these two bishops. But the reason I wanted to play this variation anyway, because I just wanted to get a position where I could play. I could just play chess. You know, it's 9:30 in the morning. I'm struggling to stay awake at the board. You know, I had to go for a coffee, get a coffee to sort of like just keep me awake. I'm feeling really bleary-eyed. So anyway, I'll play the move knight g3. Now you can also play bishop g5 in that position, which is probably the main line. But let's just look at what happened in the game because it's quite interesting. Now I think he quite possibly could have played the move h5 in this position, immediately counter-attacking against my knight on g3. I think that may well have been the best continuation. But he played the move d6, which is perfectly reasonable. I played f4, and now he played the counter-attacking move h5, which is quite a sort of, you know, aggressive stab against white. And I now have a serious problem because he's threatening to go h4 and then kick my knight away. I've got to do something aggressive myself in the centre, so I continued with f5. He played h4. I brought the knight back. This is where, like in the post-mortem, we were discussing whether or not black has time to play the move h3. But the problem is it does allow me to take on e6, and after something like this, white has won a pawn. Yes, his king is rather exposed on g2, But you could also say this is about the black king. And a move like queen d7, threatening to come in on h3, can always be met with knight f4 if white needs it. Probably has other ways of, he could also move his king back to g1, and after queen h3 maybe play rook f2. So I don't think, although this position looks rather scary, I don't think white has any problems here. But I must admit, I was rather concerned about the possibility of him playing h3. But instead of h3, he played the move e5, just blocking up the position, which is a perfectly reasonable move. I now went bishop g5, and I think this is really where he should have played the move h3. And after g3, he then tries to break through in the centre with the move d5. And generally speaking, I think this position is really good for black, because the pawn on h3 is a very useful pawn. It's kind of, I mean, it's a real strategic boon for black, just having this pawn on h3. But any endgames, white has to be very careful that the h2 pawn might drop off and the h pawn might come through. So it's very useful for any endgames. It's also useful for creating mate threats around the white king. There's no real need to go into the variations here. Just generally speaking, black should throw in the move h3. It's a very useful move. But let's just look at one possible variation. If I was to take, bishop takes, knight takes, queen takes d5, he's immediately threatening mate on g2, so probably got to go rook f2. And now black has a choice of moves. He could either play c4, creating a threat of bishop c5, or he could even just play simply bishop h6 immediately. So generally speaking, this is all rather good for black. But my opponent didn't play h3. He played bishop e7, which I think was a slight mistake. Because now I continue with a variation: bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, knight d5. Now, again, I think this is where my opponent probably should have spent more time, because I think he played a slightly ineffective move. I think he should have played something like bishop takes d5. Yeah, this is probably better. I just leave this bishop on f6 for the time being, but he played bishop g5. I now went king h1. My reasoning behind king h1 was I wanted to go knight g1 and bring the queen round to g4. And this was my idea, basically, just to create some kind of pressure against black's position. Because he's played this move h5, h4, casting kingside is always very risky. And with an open a-file, casting queenside is also extremely risky. So black's king is rather caught in a dilemma. Either way he goes, he's going to be in trouble. He can't really leave the king in the centre. And my knight on d5 rather nullifies his extra two bishops, because the knight on d5 is very strong. So at some point he's probably going to have to go bishop d5, and then he doesn't have the advantage of two bishops anymore. So actually, in this position, the two knights are actually stronger than the two bishops. He played b4, which was rather a pointless move. I went knight g1, and now he took on d5 and played queen f6, and I went knight h3. Now again, we're talking about candidate moves theory. If you look at this position and you calculate, the first thing that comes into your mind is you want to think of a plan. Now, by identifying candidate moves, that should help you to find this plan, find the correct plan. The correct plan is to try and bring the knight round to e4. Now, this was exactly what I did with this move, knight h3. Now, again, like in chess is really a clash of ideas, a battle of ideas. You have ideas, your opponent strives to prevent them. This is a typical example. Basically, my opponent knows that I want to play knight f2 at some point. You know, I may prepare it first because not allowing him to take on f5, but I will play knight f2, or I may play queen g4. It's another threat. So he wants to prevent knight f2. So the way to prevent knight f2 is to play the move bishop e3. Now, I must admit, that I rather overlooked a move in a couple of moves by my opponent. I went Queen E1. Possibly I should play C3 first. He went Queen H6. And I went Rook F3. Attacking the bishop on E3. Just trying to, like I say, if he moves the bishop away back to G5, then I can continue with my plan, Knight F2. If the knight reaches E4, it's a fantastic square for the knight. So my opponent obviously tries to prevent that idea, so he tries to create some confusion in position. He played the move Bishop D2. I went Queen E2. And now he played a move which completely took me by surprise. He went Bishop C1. Now, of course, as I said before, it's an early morning game. So, you know, the last thing I want is to see moves that I've missed by my opponent. Again, it's calculation. You know, I didn't calculate this position as well as I should have done. But at the same time, you shouldn't beat yourself up too much if you miss moves. I mean, calculation for me is all about imagination. It's all about visualization. It's all about finding ideas in a position. It's not about being completely exact and seeing every variation that's possible. You can't do that in chess. It's just too complicated a game. Don't be too concerned if you miss moves by your opponent. I missed Bishop C1 by John because what I missed was that if I could play Rook B1, he takes on B2. And if I take on B2, he plays Queen C1 check, winning the Rook. So I missed that, and it did make me feel uncomfortable. I said that sort of feeling that you have sometimes when you sat there at the board and you feel uncomfortable during the game. But rather than panicking, I thought, you know, let's look at the position objectively. Let's look at it logically. Now, I've developed my queen, my rook, and my knight. My rook on A1 is useful for coming down the A file. It can also be brought on into the attack on the king side, which is exactly what happened. You know, all black is really playing with is his queen and his bishop. How can he possibly be doing well? He can't, really, you know, if we think about it logically. So I decided, you know, not to get too bothered by all this. So I played the move F6, trying to create some open lines on the king side. You want to meet a blow with a blow, and this is exactly what happened here. Now, my opponent possibly should have played the move G6. And this is where I had prepared the move, well, I could play either C3 or C4, it probably doesn't make a huge amount of difference. But I'd sort of prepared the move rather C3, and I think C4 is better. And the point is that after black takes, so obviously C4 is defending this pawn on B2, so he's got to sort of create some kind of disturbance in the position. And then he plays the move Queen D2. This is what John was intending to play, but this is where I had calculated it quite well. I'd seen or I'd visualized the move Queen F1, and again it looks like black has no problems because, okay, he can't take on C3 because I take on C1, but it looks like the move Bishop B2 solves all his problems. If I move the rook to D1, he takes on C3, but now I go Rook F2. Again, it's about calculation, it's about visualization. He takes on C3, and now I play the move Rook A2. And the point is that black's bishop is lost. He can't go to A1 because I'm covering that square. He can't go to A3. So the only move is bishop C1. But now I go rook C2. And the bishop drops off. And yes, he can get a few pawns, but the problem is my knight remains alive. The knight is very powerful in this position. His king still has problems. So basically white is objectively winning. And I was quite proud of myself that I saw this variation at sort of 9 o'clock in the morning, basically, you know. Well, it wasn't 9 o'clock in the morning, I suppose. It was probably like 11 o'clock. But, you know, I was quite proud of myself that I saw all this. But, you know, again, it's about believing your position. If you believe in your position and you understand the position, then it becomes much easier to calculate the right lines, you know. If you feel uncomfortable, if you feel disturbed, then you will start missing stuff. You will start calculating badly. So the whole, you know, it's like a combination of factors that allows you to calculate well. So, of course, none of this happened in the game. he didn't play g6. He probably should have done. He took on b2. Now I took on g7. So if he takes on a1, I take on h8. He took. I went rook f1. And he went rook f8. Now I felt this was a key moment in the game because, yes, my opponent's position looks really horrible, but this is where you've got to identify candidate moves. Now, I felt quite happy here because I felt like I really knew what I was doing. I felt like I could identify candidate moves that would be useful for basically improving my attack. So one of the moves I calculated was a move rook f6, just threatening to take on d6. Of course, you know, he can potentially castle queenside, defending that pawn, or maybe play the move king e7. But then I thought, well, maybe there's an even stronger idea here. That's what I say about, you know, don't just play the first move you see. Look around for other possibilities. If you've got a good position, spend some time and see if there's something even stronger. So you see a strong idea, you know, great. But here I thought, well, actually, there's something even better. There's a move rook f5. And the idea behind rook f5, once you see it, it's quite obvious. The idea is to bring this knight into the game and bring it to g5, where it increases huge pressure on f7. So really, this creates this huge problem for black. And well, I mean, you look at his bishop on b1 is absolutely doing nothing. If my knight comes to g5, the bishop on b2, it might as well be a pawn. It's not hitting on anything. It doesn't do anything whatsoever. So it's a really meaningless piece. Whereas, by complete contrast, the knight on h3 coming into g5 creates all sorts of serious problems for black. My opponent castled. Yeah, bear in mind that if he plays the move f6, I can actually try and prevent knight g5, and I can actually play knight f4 here. So I felt very comfortable. He castled, and now I played the move knight g5, threatening to take on f7. You know, he can't play rook d7, trying to prevent that because I played the move knight e6. So this is why black's position probably is already completely lost. He played rook g8. I played d4. Again, you know, hitting candidate moves theory, you're going to find this move d4. You're going to think, well, how do I create a threat against the black king? d4. One of the ways I improve my calculation, by the way, is I basically would get the board out, and I'd set up a position I found interesting, and I'd try and write down as many variations as I could. And this is a way that helped me to improve my visualization, and it helped me to improve my understanding of identifying candidate moves. So really, by doing that method, so rather than sort of like sitting there and playing all the moves, you just sit there and look at a position like this, for example, for say 10 minutes or 5 minutes or half an hour, however long, and try and think of as many variations as you can and write down the possible variations. And this, like I say, this helps you with your visualization. And I also find now when I'm calculating, I've got a lot more options. I've got a lot more possible candidate moves than I used to have. And I think that's really helped my chess. So I went d4 in this position. He went king b8. But basically the position's really desperate for black. I took on a6. It really sort of falling apart at this point. He went rook d7. I went queen b6. I mean, there's various possible ways of defending, but he decided to play rook b7. Basically, I think it all leads to the same thing. For example, if he goes king a8, then I go queen c6 check. And when he goes rook b7, I take on f7. And if he takes on g5, it's queen b7 mate. So basically, his king is just too exposed. He's only really defending with his rook on d7. So he went rook d7. I went check. He went king a8. And I took on f7. Yeah, and I think in this position he actually, well, I mean, the problem is that, he would like to take on g5, but then I played queen a6 check, and it's going to be checkmate next move. So he decided, obviously with a look of resignation on his face, John decided to play queen g6, and this is why I went rook f8 check, and basically he resigned in this position. I think he realised that, well, I mean, you cannot take, because after rook takes f8, white has to move queen takes g6 at the end. And if you play king a7, which is a natural move, well, white has several wins in this position. I think one of the nicest ways to win was to play the move, again, candidate moves theory. If you use a candidate moves theory, then you may, if you don't use the candidate moves theory, you may feel uncomfortable calculating here. But because I've done all this stuff at home, I've done this preparation at home, it's quite easy for me to identify candidate moves. So, what moves would I look at here? I'd probably look at queen takes c5 check is a good move. And in fact, that's a winning move. Bringing this rook back to f6 might be strong. Another possible move. But the move I was intending to play when I was calculating was rook f6, because the point is that after he takes on g5, I simply mate him on a6. And the other nice variation is if he takes on f8, instead of taking on g6, which allows a mate on f1, I throw in the check king here, and now I take on f8. And he only has one square for the king, and then I take on g6, which is completely winning. So it's quite a nice attack, but again, because I'd used this, I basically trained at home, on my visualization, on my calculation. Games like this are a lot easier than they probably were a few months ago when I was struggling with my calculation. I don't think I would have played a game like this, say, a year ago or something like this. I probably would have flapped around and probably would have gone horribly wrong at some point. But yeah, I mean, it's something you need to remember when you're calculating. Let's just go through some of the basic points of calculation just to sum up the whole video series. I think one thing you need to do, like I say, is work on your calculation. So do what I suggested. Get the board out. Don't just sort of like sit there running your Fritz in the background on your chess space or whatever. It's a good idea to get the chessboard out and actually look at variations. Use your mind. Use your brain. Get used to using your brain. Sit down, write some variations down. Try to think in terms of visualization. Remember, chess is basically imagination. It's not all about brute force. It's about the ability to visualize what might happen in the future. Like I say, another thing you need to do when you're playing, when you're calculating, is always check your variations as well. It's very important. We saw in that Glenn Fleer game how I didn't check the variations, and that really cost me. And so checking your variations is very important. Also remember that when you're calculating, most of the relevant variations are something like 4 to 5 moves deep. It's important to acquaint yourself with all the short-term tactics in the position. Now, if the line is very forcing, or if you feel necessary to do so, go very deep into the position. Go very we looked at the Colin McNabb game where I went very deep in the opening, just to sort of acquaint myself with all the particular ideas of the position, rather than sort of rushing through. So I think there are moments where you should go deep, but do remember that, long variations are all very well and good, but if you're blundering a piece early on in the variation, it's kind of pointless. You need to be acquainted with the short-term tactics of the position before you start looking too deeply into the position. But I do think the good calculation is a combination of factors, but it's something that people take for granted, I think. I think you constantly have, doesn't matter what level you play at, you constantly have to work on your calculation. And the better the player, the more they understand the moments to think during the game. Time is very important. How much time you spend on a move is very important. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this particular video series, and hopefully I can do some more in future for the chess world. And you know, I really enjoyed doing these videos, and I hope you enjoyed watching.